Good afternoon. I also join in the chorus of congratulations to this faculty. This event is extremely useful and interesting for experts. So please keep up the good job, because at this university we have a nucleus of expertise and experts in the area of geospatial data, for which we are very grateful to you. In my presentation today, I would like to draw your attention to one interesting point, the integration of land management and cultural heritage documentation. We started this process in 2021 when we adopted a large law on the land deregulation and decentralization. So in my presentation, I'll try to explain why certain norms and regulations were included in the law, how we would like to implement them, and what impact we would like to achieve to improve the status of our natural and cultural heritage, because we all understand that our culture is something for which our military and our people are fighting today. And if we fail to keep the heritage, we will no longer be Ukrainians. First of all, let's take a look at the overall scale of this problem. The objects of architectural and cultural heritage are quite sizable in scope. If we get information from our relevant registers, we can count more than 170,000 of objects of archaeological and cultural heritage. Many people think that this is just about buildings, but the lion's share of those objects are archaeological heritage. So basically, these are places on which there are risks of ruining of historically significant places and locations. You probably know that we basically almost don't have any limitations on that heritage in the land cadastre. And the big problem is that a lot of objects of archaeological heritage were qualified back in the Soviet Union. Those are paper documents, very rough, very imprecise ones, with very poor statistics, with poor accuracy, and there are also a lot of sites which are found during archaeological excavations, and so they are added to this list, and they bring about new issues. This lack of proper registration in cadastre leads to a situation that we fail to properly protect our cultural and architectural heritage. So setting up this documentation is a very complicated and complex and multifaceted issue. It requires the engagement of specialists of different disciplines and areas of knowledge, and 170,000 heritage objects. Therefore, only very few of them are backed up with proper documents. From the legal point of view, all our register of heritage sites are reflected in a special table, the custodian of which is the Ministry of Culture. But this table and the contents of it is not being updated. And this is a big problem because up to 1/3 of the objects which are qualified as archaeological heritage are not being updated in terms of their status. So the lack of these issues in the cadastre makes an impact on the work of developers. Well, we know that developers like buying land plots in historically significant places, but basically by doing so, they very often just spoil and mar the landscape and the environment of the city, but they just don't care. And unfortunately, there are no rigid limitations which would make it impossible for the developers to do so. There's a lot of chaos in this field and a lot of wrongful actions going on. That is why a very important issue today is to set up accurate lists of geospatial data, which would be included in the state land cadastre and become legally obligatory for those who deal with construction, development, and so on. Well, we have here experts who are accustomed to working with geospatial data, and primarily when we speak about this data, we are talking about precision. But when we speak about heritage, we cannot speak about precision in any shape or form. We have documents which show, for instance, the boundaries of historical reserves in Kyiv, for instance. You can see them in certain documents, but all that stems from the decision of Kyiv's council deputy in 1979. This is, for instance, this one is related to Kyiv-Pechsk fortress. This one is about the heart of Kyiv, Sophia Cathedral, St. Michael Square. All this has legal force, and on the basis of this, one can take a decision whether anything new can be built there. If something is built, what should it look like? Is it allowed to show advertising, placards, and big boards there, and so on? But very often, all these boundaries are not clear. Like, for instance, it's not clear whether a satellite can be put on one side of the street. What about the other side? There's no clarity. Therefore, all this documentation very often creates problems because it's so blurred. A very important issue today is to include information about heritage objects and the preserved areas around them, which would make it impossible to build anything that can result in the ruin of historically significant places. There should be also requirements to the physical form of the objects to be built, the outward look, and so on. And again, I'd like to repeat that at the level of design documents, we do have protected zones in Ukraine. Overall, there's about 11,000 of such areas, which means that less than 1/10 of the overall objects of heritage have more or less protected zones around them.
Ці обмеження вносити. Причина, я думаю, всім зрозуміла. Пам'яткоохоронні обмеження
The reason, I think, is understood to everyone, because the restrictions on the land use create difficulties for developers. So they're always against this historical architectural protection of plan. So the massive creation of inventory of the objects of cultural and historical heritage, including them into cadastre. The Ministry of Culture, and those who are responsible for this, very often looked at it as absolutely unrealistic task. There has never been money in the state budget and local budgets for heritage protection activities, project documentation. It was impossible to develop for so many objects at our specialized institutions like Institute of Archaeology, Institute of Protection of Monuments. They used to say we can do not more than 40 objects, but 40 objects of 170,000, it's nothing. Separate task is our historical settlements. We have 101. We used to have plans, historical architectural plan, but only 25% of settlements have them. So 75% of historical settlements don't have identified historical areas, and therefore unregulated development there. What did we want to do when a big law on land decentralization was in the process of adoption? We had a very naive wish to move forward this issue and to invent some instruments, but we wanted to create some instruments which would allow to fill the land cadastre of Ukraine with information of heritage restrictions and limitations. But we wanted to registration of this sort of documentation. We all understand that every monument is unique, unlike the electric power grid, where by geometry you can identify the restricted area. With the monument, you cannot do this. You should have a creative approach. You had to find out what is relation to the environment, how valuable it is, and so on. So it's manual work, so to say. But we'd like this work to be done on the good quality topographic basis. We would like not to see these little sketches which archaeologists draw and say, this is approximately the neighborhood which should be protected on this territory. Once my colleague brought to me from Cherkasy Oblast, they asked where are the mounds in the field. They draw a scheme for him. He lost that scheme and asked them to draw a new one. So they drew him a new one, then he found the old scheme, and he compared both, and these mounds were on different places. So sometimes it may lead even to corruption, such discrepancies. So why do we have to integrate land management and heritage protection documentation? Because those who protect heritage should work on the basis of topographic basis, which would be part of land cadastre. This should be clearly defined boundaries. Therefore, the first is mutual integration. The second, what we offered, and it was a very serious compromise for many engaged into heritage protectors, It's a two-stage formation of restrictions in terms of protection of heritage protection. So we decided to identify the regulatory sizes, 20, 100, 300 meters, depending on the type of an object, and the establishment of restrictions should take two stages. First, with the dot, with the point, we indicate where the heritage object is, and then we draw a circle which would cover the territory which is subject to protection. We include this into the cadastre and provide for protection of these monuments, and then when we have money for full-scale heritage protection documentation, we will process this once again. So we want to introduce this approach in 2022. We were prepared to do that. The Ministry of Culture had 70 million hryvnias for making inventory list of monuments and heritage protection sites. The World Bank was ready to fund the pilot projects, and we hope that the new Minister of Culture he received the wishes from the party and servant to the people, and we hope that this work will be done and will get certain foundation for protection of objects of cultural heritage, at least at a temporary basis, and then further on to organize the full-fledged protection of these heritage sites.